This is the first time I've ever worn a cap and gown. I'm simply not a ceremonial type, and when I graduated in 1972, it was June and hot, and it meant waiting around for 10 more days. A classmate, my best friend and now the great American poet Brooks Haxton, invited me to go fishing with him at his home in Natchez, Mississippi. So that's what we did. Still, I want to emphasize now how honored I am to have been invited to speak today, 45 years later, in a cap and gown that's been custom fit for me. I was a little frantic as soon as I had been asked to do this, so I Googled commencement speech, and this is what turned up. A commencement speech is an opportunity to share your experience, values, and advice. The precise form is up to you. This affords the speaker a platform to say unlimited things. Well, as there are no limitations to what I can talk about, I thought I'd share with you what I learned from a 400-page book I translated last year, Photographic Lenses in 19th Century Germany and Austria. I'm just kidding. I did translate the book, but I'm not going to talk about it or about photography at all, and even very little regarding sculpture and painting, so the photographers won't be the only ones feeling left out. I want to talk about art as a whole, and specifically about literature as well. My greatest love in life is literature, which is what I studied at school. I think I need first, however, to give you an idea of where these ideas are coming from. I was born to an Italian mother and an American father. Art was what they cared about most, and my sisters and I were fortunate to have lived in many places and to have been dragged to museums and concerts everywhere. Gigliola taught art history, and my dad adored music, especially Bach and opera. It was my mother who gave me her too complicated camera at age 14. As I am addressing primarily the students here who are about to embark on a new chapter in their lives, my intention today is to celebrate them and also their instructors by celebrating the realm of human activity which they have so bravely chosen to contribute to, that is, the realm of creativity. The renowned biologist and naturalist E.O. Wilson won the Pulitzer Prize in 2011 for a book he wrote entitled Origins of Creativity. This is what he wrote. What then is creativity? It is the innate quest for originality, the driving force in humanity's instinctive love of novelty, the discovery of new entities and processes, the solving of old challenges and the disclosure of new ones, the aesthetic surprise of unanticipated facts and theories, the pleasure of new faces, the thrill of new worlds. We judge creativity by the magnitude of the emotional response it evokes. We follow it inward toward the greatest depths of our minds and outward to imagine reality across the universe. As I said earlier, it is the world of literature that I would like to focus my attention on. Over several decades of reading, I have toyed with the idea of compiling a list of passages in novels that illustrate the transformative power of art. Art that has the ability to illuminate and even affect the course of one's life. I will mention just a few of these today. The first is Miguel Cervantes' classic, Don Quixote. The great critic Harold Bloom has said repeatedly that there has been nothing in the history of literature to equal Cervantes and Shakespeare, not Joyce, Tolstoy, Dickens, or James. Cervantes takes us on a journey that lasts over 1,000 pages, events that are both exhilarating and devastating. The two protagonists, Don Quixote and his squire, Sancho Panza, delight us with their insane humor, their witty exchanges, and their loyalty and devotion to defending the weak and the oppressed. The entire novel revolves around the imaginary, sometimes hallucinatory tendencies of our famous knight. Over time, the adjective quixotic was coined to mean extravagant or visionary. For me, the most powerful moment, the climax of this novel, comes only a few pages from the end, when the two adventurers have finally returned home and Quixote suddenly takes ill. We see the desperation of his best friends when they hear him renounce the fantastical world of chivalry and courtly love that he had been consumed by his entire life. They beg him to reconsider. The friends' realization that this unique man is dying and that soon they will no longer be able to enjoy his inventive mind suddenly becomes unbearable. Cervantes writes, "When his three friends heard him talk thus, they concluded that he was stricken with some new madness. Sanson then said to him, 'What does all this mean, Don Quixote? Now that we are just about to become shepherds and spend our days singing and living like princes, you talk about turning yourself into a hermit. No more foolish tales, I beg you. Come back to your senses.' 'Woe is me,' cried Sancho in all tears. 'Don't die on me. Take my advice and live on for many a year. The maddest trick a man can play in life is to yield up the ghost without more ado. Shame on you, master.'" The power of Don Quixote's imagination had become an integral part of their lives too, a nourishment, a balm for the emptiness, the adversities, the pains of life, and they are horrified at the idea of its loss. Imagination is our propellant, our haven, our lifeline. Another work I would like to mention is The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann, which won him the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1929. I imagine that for many of the younger generation, this name doesn't mean much, certainly less than Don Quixote. A little background then. Mann was German, born in 1875, and wrote The Magic Mountain at about age 50 after the disastrous First World War and the eve of Hitler's rise to power. I thought it would be pertinent to talk about this book as it is a novel about initiation, a commencement, if you will. A young man, Hans Castorp, about to start a career in engineering, discovers while visiting a cousin at a sanitarium that he too has a mild case of tuberculosis. His condition does not get better, and the 3 weeks he had expected to remain there turn into 7 years. Castorp lives in an unreal atmosphere, not unlike the ivory towers of academia, secluded in the mountains among many very interesting personalities, some of them patients there and others visitors. It is in this place that he undergoes a heightening process that makes him capable of experiences in sensual, moral, and intellectual spheres that he would never have dreamed of in the flat lands. One particular experience that struck me, and the reason I have included this novel in my talk, is his discovery of the potency of music. The director of the sanitarium is concerned about the morale of his patients and is constantly proposing activities. One day, he provokes an explosion of joy in the guests when he has a new invention delivered, a gramophone, the best on the market. Castorp takes charge and becomes the custodian of this delicate machine and the large record collection made up of operas and symphonies. To read Mann's description and the effect this object has on the patients, and in particular on Castorp, is one of the most moving definitions of art and its revelatory power. Mann writes, "While the director was introducing his new toy to the guests, the young man had remained in the background, not laughing or applauding as they, but following the performance with tense interest. Several times he restlessly shifted his position, then he took up his stand close to the director with his hands behind his back and an enigmatic expression on his face, fixing the casket with his eye. But within him something was saying, 'Hold on, this is an epic. This thing was sent to me.' He was filled with the surest foreknowledge of a new passion, a new enchantment, a new burden of love. The youth in the flat land who at first sight of a maiden marvels to find himself pierced to the heart with love's barbed arrow feels not greatly different. This chapter, Fullness of Harmony, continues with extraordinary descriptions of his appreciation of various Italian and French operas and ends finally with a song by Franz Schubert, The Linden Tree, a piece known and beloved by all German people. Mann's writing skips from philosophical inquiries to impassioned exchanges, and it is hard to reveal in just a few quotes. Please note how many times he uses the word love. May we take it that our simple hero, after so many years of hermetic pedagogic discipline, of ascent from one stage of being to another, has now reached a point where he is conscious of the meaningfulness of his love and the object of it? We assert, we record that he has. To him, the song meant a whole world, a world which he must have loved, else he could not have so desperately loved that which it represented and symbolized to him. And finally, a book that may not have changed my life, but certainly one that has taught me how to better deal with problems. Robert Pirsig's Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. It came out in 1974, after 25 publishers rejected it, and it has become a classic cult book translated into many languages. It's about a motorcycle trip a father takes with his 11-year-old son across the U.S. The father is trying desperately to reconnect with his son after having spent a year in an insane asylum. While teaching at a university, he had lost his mind in an obsessive attempt to define the concept of quality. This book is subtitled An Inquiry into Values. The father is retracing his steps to try to understand his past schizophrenia and therefore attempt to reunite his two identities. And again, a young person, his son, an adolescent concerned about his future and his own identity. Pirsig proposes, and this is what struck me most profoundly, that we must abandon the dichotomy of romanticism versus classicism, or the fear of technology in favor of nature. As the title suggests, he posits that with the right attitude, an open Zen mind, one can accept and appreciate technology and in the end better one's life. He writes, "The ugliness that some people flee is not inherent in technology. It only seems that way to them because it's so hard to isolate what it is within technology that's so ugly. But technology is simply the making of things, and the making of things can't by its own nature be ugly, or there would be no possibility for beauty in the arts, which also include the making of things." Actually, the root word technology is the Greek tekne, which originally meant art. The ancient Greeks never separated art from manufacture in their minds, and so they never developed separate words for them. So this brings me to the group of graduate students we are honoring today. In visiting with them, viewing their work, and questioning them, I found that what unites their art is precisely the inquiry into identity, and in many cases, that of coping with new technologies. Victoria Hodge and Alexandra Wong are both concerned with this fascinating transitional moment between analog and digital techniques. Victoria in a very intimate and spiritual way, and Alexandra with the use of symbolic, even iconic subjects. I sensed very complex identities in the work of Jane Mason, with her Korean Atlanta, Georgia past, and her heroic struggle to adapt to structure after her self-taught origins. In Lindsay Johnson, with her Catholic heritage and her fight to take feminism to a higher poetic level. In Jay Dexter and the multiple identities mirrored in the Tiepolo-like panoplies, inspired perhaps by her early love of the flight of birds. And Maria Nissan, there she is, who through her work has so beautifully bridged her complex Iraqi-American past with the identities of all those who have in some way communed together in the coffee shops across her hometown. Coco Laney, our deep South Alabamian photographer, more than on her own question of personal identity, has focused her lens in a lyrical, journalistic mood, delicately scrutinizing the identities, past and future, of those African immigrants fortunate enough to have made it alive across the Mediterranean. And finally, Maga, who probably has the most complex self of all, based in Geneva, but born and raised in Zimbabwe of Swedish parents, and working 16 years for the World Health Organization in Indonesia, Jamaica, and other countries. It was especially exciting for me to see how she has found the perfect balance of technology and aesthetics to create her striking images. I was happily surprised by how you are all women, a sign of the times that are finally changing in a very positive way. I believe we should have put women in positions of political power long before now. Women are more circumspect, more patient, and more loving. As the German poet Rilke writes, women in whom life lingers and dwells more immediately, more fruitfully, and more confidently, must surely have become fundamentally riper people, more human people than easygoing man, who is not pulled down below the surface of life by the weight of any fruit of his body. I know from my own career and from watching those of my two children, William, pianist, composer in Brooklyn, and Alice, a dancer, performance artist in London, how difficult a decision it is to devote one's life to art. It is often a life of solitude, of sacrifice, and of paucity. That's an elegant way of saying you could be penniless. But I can think of nothing nobler to gift the world, like Cervantes with your imagination, like Mann with your passion, and like Persig with your devotion to truth and to value, is the highest form of altruism and generosity. I do sincerely believe that art can save the world. Art brings people closer to one another by its need to share. Being an artist is to belong to a family. It is an act of love. Seeing the work of the artist-choreographer Tino Segal last year at the Palais de Tokyo in Paris overwhelmed me with this message. There was nothing on the walls of this vast exhibition space, only his performers and dancers moving, running, and accosting visitors to relate in brief but intense anecdotes some of their most intimate secrets. I left the museum totally uplifted and filled with a sense of a transcendent universal love that I have never felt before. One of my favorite, more recent writers, John Berger, talks about how other people's stories can enter into our bloodstream and become a part of our collective being. As everything I have said today, the same could apply to a painting, a photograph, a dance, or a song. It is with this last passage that I will end my talk today, honoring our 8 graduate students. This is from one of the last works Berger wrote, called Bento's Sketchbook. When we are impressed and moved by a story, it engenders something that becomes, or may become, an essential part of us. And this part, whether small or extensive, is the story's descendant or offspring. What I'm trying to define is more idiosyncratic and personal than a mere cultural inheritance. It is as if the bloodstream of the red story joins the bloodstream of one's life story. It contributes to our becoming what we become and will continue to become. Without any of the complications and conflicts of family ties, these stories that shape us are our coincidental as distinct from our biological ancestors. Somebody in this Paris suburb, perhaps sitting tonight in a chair and reading the brothers Karamazov, may already, in this sense, be a distant, distant cousin. Thank you for your kind attention.